You guys will not believe what I just stumbled across on Twitter. I have never seen this before. I had no idea that the Fed's plan to confiscate gold from America went back almost to its very inception. Obviously, we know that FDR confiscated the gold from Americans in a misguided attempt to try and save the nation from the Great Depression, consolidate the gold, raise the price that he could issue more currency, and inflate the price of everything to try and stop the depression, because he thought the cause of the depression was prices going down. So if we can cause inflation, prices go up, then that'd fix everything. Obviously, that is the stupidest, most idiotic form of top-down centralized control of an economy. But the plan to confiscate gold from Americans went back far before we ever got to FDR. To take a look with me at this letter from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas here. As you can see, this is dated December 19th, 1918. Now, I apologize because I know this image is going to be a little bit blurry, so I'm going to read it out just in case it is too blurry to read on your screen. To the bank addressed, a number of the banks are continuing their cooperation in the matter of concentrating gold into reserve, but the large majority have apparently come to the conclusion that either gold coin and gold certificates have become too scarce to warrant the trouble of culling the few that find their way to the bank, or that the necessity for it no longer exists. Okay, so in order to explain this first paragraph, basically what we need to understand is that prior to the Federal Reserve, there was no central bank. So a bank was on its own. The way that a bank operated was basically everybody gives their gold to the bank, and then the bank gives them a piece of paper money in exchange for that gold. And that paper certificate says, hey, at any time you can come and get your gold from the bank. And because that paper was redeemable for gold, that basically represented ownership of gold at the bank, you could trade that paper as money. People would accept it as money because at any time, anybody who took that for exchange, whether you bought a house or groceries with it, anybody could take that piece of paper and go get gold for it. And so the gold was the money. The paper just represented transferring the ownership of that gold. That's how banks operated. The problem is that banks did not hold 100% reserves. This is commonly called fractional reserve banking. I like to call it fraudulent reserve banking because when there's a contract that states at any time you can come get your gold that you own from me, and then if everybody decides to do that, I don't have enough gold, that's fraud. If I cannot deliver on my contractual obligation, and I'm doing that on purpose, that is fraud. Okay, so that's how banks operated. They held some gold and they issued a lot more paper than there was actually gold to back it up. Now, most of the time, this didn't cause a huge issue because to have a bank run, you need some sort of distrust to come up. And most of the time they held enough gold so that if 5%, 10%, 30% of the people came to get their gold, they'd be able to do that. But every once in a while you did have a bank run, and so you'd have a bank collapse, and then everybody would realize that they were actually bankrupt, they defaulted, they didn't have the money, so there'd be local economic pain because a bank went too far, people trusted somebody that wasn't trustworthy. Now, the obvious solution here would have been to outlaw fraudulent reserve banking, but instead they just nationalized it. And so over the course of a few hundred years, countries started developing central banks, which is basically a bank on top of all the other banks. So if one bank had a bank run, they could just go to the central bank and they could say, central bank, give me some of your gold so that I can stop this bank run from happening. And if everybody goes to get their gold and then they realize everybody can get their gold, the bank run stops, because the only reason the bank run's happening is because people think they won't be able to get their gold if they're not the first in line. But if they know they can get the gold, they'll actually leave the gold there. So everybody looked at the central bank and thought, hey, that's a brilliant solution to this. If this one bank has a bank run, then we can just draw on the reserves from the rest of the system and we can stop bank runs from ever happening again. And so apparently the Federal Reserve here is basically saying, hey, look, there are some banks that are looking at this and saying, hey, there's really not that much gold that has been left in the banks at the local level. We've centralized most of it up to the Federal Reserve at this point. And so they don't find any necessity to continue getting the little bit of gold that's still left in the banking system up to the Fed. But this letter goes on to say that the necessity will continue until every dollar of gold, either coin or certificate, that it is possible to obtain has been placed in reserve. It is far more valuable to the government as a basis for credit than it is to the individual as circulation, and will continue to have this ratio of greater value to the government regardless of war or peace conditions. Now, we've all heard about the political independence of the Federal Reserve. And I love the book Creature from Jekyll Island that details the origins of the Federal Reserve. But one of the issues I have with that book is that it paints the picture that the Fed is completely separate from the government. And in reality, the central bank does not exist without the express permission of the government for the express benefit of the government. That's why it exists. It's very possible that it did not start out entirely that way, but it would have never continued if it would have been just to profit the private individual owners and not had any benefit to the government. And as you can see, even if it started off that way, it only took 5 years, this is 1918, before from the Federal Reserve themselves, they are saying it's far more valuable to the government as a basis for credit than it is to the individual as circulation. They're basically saying, we will not stop in our efforts to centralize every single ounce of gold from all over the nation because there's no benefit to an individual. It's far more valuable to the government. Now, this is also preposterous because if it is valuable to the government, that means it is more valuable to the individual, not as circulation, but as a defense against government abuse of money, as purchasing power, as savings, as a way to preserve your wealth. That is the reason why they wanted to confiscate it. Not because it's not valuable to the individual, but because it is so valuable to the individual. The Federal Reserve would not have been able to confiscate the purchasing power of Americans through printing before confiscating the gold. Going on, the Federal Reserve notes are intended to take the place as circulation of gold coin and gold certificates. They are the development of a scientific plan to meet the fluctuation of currency needs, being issued in sufficient quantity to meet the requirements at crop moving periods and automatically retired as the demand decreases. But a reserve of gold equal to 40% of the Federal Reserve notes in circulation is required at all times. Again, this is 1918. They're saying the plan is to retire all gold and gold certificates as money and replace them with Federal Reserve notes. Why? So that we can control exactly how much money is in circulation. We can't leave it up to the idiot individuals, the free market, private parties, determining the value of money and when they want to spend and borrow and save based on the value of money relative to everything else. No. That would be a recipe for disaster for the government. Instead, we need to control the supply of money at all times. This is what's known as the elasticity of the supply of money. They wanted to control this because if they can inflate the supply of money when they deem it necessary and deflate the supply of money when they deem it necessary, they can control prices. How is this? Okay, so the price of anything in a free market is going to be the information about how scarce or abundant that thing is relative to everything else. With money, the price of money is going to be the interest rate. So imagine in a free market where money is not controlled by anybody and there's a lot of money. Well, if somebody wants to borrow money then for spending, the interest rate's going to be really low because there are a lot of savers who are all competing with each other to be the lender. So you might be able to borrow at a 1% interest rate because everybody's competing with each other for lending. And so you can borrow at a low rate because money is abundant, so the cost of money is low. This signal that's sent out to the economy is one of abundance of money, and it says spend. It says borrow because there's a huge pool of savings to draw on, so go and take risks and achieve growth. Now, opposite scenario, let's say you have very little savings pool. Nobody has any money. Everybody spent money, and so nobody has a lot of savings. Well, now anybody who wants to borrow is going to be paying a really high interest rate because anybody who does have a little bit of savings is able to command a high interest rate. There's no competition for it. And so everybody needs money. So the cost of money is going to go up. It's going to be a very expensive thing to do. Why is that? Well, the information being sent to the economy is that money is scarce. So save. The incentive then flips to save instead of spend, because if you can save and become a lender, you'll profit. And so it's a self-correcting mechanism. Free market money that's not controlled sends self-correcting signals to the market about the abundance or the scarcity of money, and whether it is expensive or cheap is how that information is communicated. So you can see here that without intervention, the money supply as in circulation is already elastic. You don't need the total quantity of money to be elastic. The free market takes care of the elasticity by itself by communicating how scarce or abundant the money supply is, and then people make educated decisions based on the cost of money versus the cost of everything else about spending or saving. It is a self-correcting mechanism that prevents large-scale blow-up. But as you can see here, they have a scientific plan to meet the fluctuation of currency needs, because they are smarter than the aggregate of all subjective value of all market participants combined, obviously. And that's why 1913 Federal Reserve was started. 1918, 1919, 1920, we get the first Great Depression because of the Fed's mistakes. And then they didn't learn from their mistakes. So fast forward 9 years after that Great Depression fixed itself, and you get the one we all call the Great Depression today that started in 1929. All built on the backs of scaling up the idiocy and centralizing the control of money. Moving on, it is estimated that $5 million or more is still circulating or hoarded in the 11th district, and the banks are earnestly requested to continue their assistance toward getting this placed with the Federal Reserve Bank, where it may be used for greater benefit to a larger number of people. Banks that supply gold to customers who operate under import and export license are requested to reduce their holdings to a minimum. Basically, they're saying here, hey, there are some people that are hoarding gold. Now, remember, gold is money. Maybe not today. It operates like very good money today. Maybe not for exchange purposes, but for store of value. But in this day, in 1918, gold was the money. The paper was just representing the ownership of that money. So they're saying people are hoarding money, and we need to stop that. This is at best incompetence and at worst malevolence, because you have somebody saying free individuals are deciding based on factors that subjectively is most valuable to them that they want to save right now. And they are labeling these people as hoarders of gold, when really they're savers of money. So first we need to dispel this myth that hoarding money is a bad thing. To the extent that somebody hoards money, the available money in circulation goes down. When the money supply goes down relative to everything else, that means prices go down. So to the extent that you have savers or money hoarders, you're actually having a deflationary force for everybody else. That means you're making life cheaper for everybody else. Second, if you are able to save money, the only way to get money is to provide a good or a service. So if you provide a good or a service to society, you get money. Money represents a claim on wealth. You can then exchange that money for wealth at some point in the future whenever you choose to. So if you spend your life creating goods and services, giving them to society in exchange for money, but you just hoard that money and store it up, you've literally spent your life in service to society, creating goods and services and getting nothing in return. Yes, you have a large hoard or a bucket of claims on wealth, but you haven't redeemed those claims. You've taken no real wealth out of society in exchange for the wealth that you've created. So the money hoarder or the saver here is doing a service to society by giving real wealth, producing real wealth, without getting anything in return, without extracting anything else out from society, and they're making life cheaper for everybody else than it would be otherwise. But instead of allowing this service to continue, which is a benefit to free market participants, creating more wealth in the long run, they want to get their dirty, sticky little fingers into this and stop this from happening. Customers who apply to their banks for gold coins to be used as Christmas presents should be induced to use instead Liberty bonds or war savings stamps. This is the worst part about this, in my opinion. It's like, even the very, very small amount of people out there who are saying, hey, as a Christmas gift, I want to give somebody a little bit of gold to be able to have them, preserve their purchasing power, build up some savings. It's like, you need to try and not let them do that, and instead give them something persuade them to buy something that is way worse in value, a Liberty bond or a war savings stamp, something that relies on faith and trust in an entity rather than something that has preserved its purchasing power for thousands of years. All because we think that we are smarter and we deserve the more valuable asset, the gold, and you plebs should be forced to use the paper and only get the paper instead. Because we're going to then use that power to manipulate the economy in a way that we think is advantageous, regardless of the fact that history has always proved that wrong. Now, like I said in the beginning, I was shocked when I saw this. I really had no idea that this plan went all the way back to 1918. And the very fact that this is in writing in 1918 means it happened even before that, which makes me think that, this is only 5 years after the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. This had to have been part of the original plan right from the start. Yes, this plan wasn't fully completed until Executive Order 6102, where FDR finally confiscated the gold in 1933 and made it illegal to own any gold. But by that time, almost nobody had any gold anymore because, as you can see, for decades, the Federal Reserve had been slowly sucking it out of circulation and bullying people into accepting paper and fiat instead. Moral of the story is that when you know something is right, don't give in to the bully, even if they say it's for the greater good, because most of the time, when somebody says it's for the greater good, therefore give me the power, the only good it's greater for is their own. As always, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.